What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on Friday, December 5th, 2025, as the early signing period for the 2026 class has come to a close, at least as far as Oregon is concerned, with all 21 of Oregon's commits signing on the dotted line. I am joined by ScoopDuck owner and publisher, Justin Hopkins. J-Hop, how are you? Been a minute.
It has been a minute. I know you've had some changes there in your landscape, and it was a busy week with recruiting, of course. And so, yeah, nice to get back into one of these, and I know you'll get back in your rhythm moving forward.
Yeah, I was telling the Scoop Duck subscribers that I was moving over the weekend, so it's been a crazy week for me, but getting everything kind of under my belt now and getting my footing back. So could probably make the argument there's no worse time to move, but life does what life does, so you got to make it happen. But I'm glad to be back here on the podcast with you, and there's no shortage of things for us to talk about here with Dan landing on the Ducks, signing the nation's number 3 recruiting class according to the Rivals rankings. Just a couple of numbers off the top that stand out to me. This is the 3rd straight cycle that Oregon has finished with the top 5 class, the 4th straight cycle that they finished with the top 10 class, I believe, and they had the highest average commit rating of any team in the country. I think LSU was right there on their heels, but I believe Oregon got the crown in that category. So there's a lot of places we can start here. We can start with Chris Henry Jr. That's the freshest news off the top, or we could even talk about Jaylen Lott, who was the last Oregon commit to submit his papers. So what are you thinking? Where do you want to kick things off?
May as well lead off with the headliner, which has been the Chris Henry Jr. drama, I guess. And on that note, obviously we know now he's going to stick with his Ohio State commitment. It certainly just anywhere you looked yesterday afternoon, it looked like it was Oregon, right? And I know you and I even got prepped because we'd heard and been told that things might break loose pretty soon, and obviously it didn't. I still went on about my night last night thinking everything is good or should be good, and had heard something about the Pat McAfee show but didn't really know for sure if that was the case. But that's recruiting, right? I mean, that's just recruiting, and I think it definitely makes it a little bit worse because everybody kind of felt like, oh man, this is going to happen. Oregon's going to get this guy. If he'd have just gone on and signed on Wednesday with Ohio State, I don't think anybody would have been too bothered by it. So, but I mean, I don't know. I know everybody's upset, or not everybody, but a lot of Duck fans are upset or bummed or whatever the case might be. But I'm going to look at the other side of the coin and just say, hey, man, be thankful you got a head coach that doesn't have an offensive coordinator on staff currently and can still put the program in that kind of position, because we've seen it pay off. You got DeCorian Moore. You've got, some other guys that are really good. It didn't work out this time, and it doesn't work out every time. And I think, I think if you looked at Washington fans, they'd gladly trade spots with you right now.
This was a really interesting recruitment to cover, Justin. I mean, that I've spent a lot of time around Mater Dei these past couple of years with some of the guys that have been committed to Oregon coming from the Monarchs program. I covered both Caden Dixon-Wyatt and Chris Henry Jr. this year at their game against St. John Bosco, and they went off for a combined 5 touchdowns. But it really felt like the sequence of events was Henry didn't sign on Wednesday after Heartline left. When Heartline left, like, that was immediately where my mind went. I'm like, I think that Oregon has a legitimate chance to pull this off. That was kind of the last hurdle that was in Oregon's way with Henry and his recruitment. And then all throughout Wednesday and pretty much all throughout Thursday, all the calls that I was making were suggesting that Oregon was in prime position to pull this one off. And then we wake up on Friday, and Rivals' Steve Wiltfong is reporting that OSU has maybe gotten the edge here at the 11th hour, and Henry announces that he's going to sign with the Buckeyes, where he had been committed for more than 2 years. So I do think you make a good point about Oregon even being in contention for this. That says a lot about where the Ducks are at. If they were able to get him, it would have been back-to-back cycles with the number 1 wide receiver, but the Ducks still finished with a program record 5 5-star recruits, and they didn't lose anybody despite losing both Tosh Lupoi and Will Stein, and that's pretty notable.
Yep. completely notable. I mean, I think it just speaks to, the integrity of Dan Lanning and the integrity of the program, the way these coaches are, honest enough. And that's what you have to be, right? Because there's no guarantee in coaching, right? I mean, you don't know where Brian Hartline is going to be. You don't know where Oregon's offensive coordinator is going to be a year from now. I mean, that's just the nature of the business. So, I think it's really important there that you build those relationships with these recruits and that you have several coaches building them, because if their position coach leaves or the coordinator on the side of the ball they're on leaves, you have other relationships to lean into, and keep, obviously guys from flipping. So definitely kudos to the staff on that, because this thing could have very easily unraveled at the seams, if Oregon hasn't recruited that way, which, probably segues perfectly into Jaylen Lott, the other big story, which was, his paperwork missing, if you will, for about a day and a half, I guess, if you will. Um, you know, Offensive coordinator Will Stein goes, Jaylen Lott is a Texas kid. This kid is one that just like shot up the rankings. He did nothing but go up the rankings like the whole time he was committed to Oregon. So, really big get, a really good pedigree for him. Kid can play on both sides of the ball. Obviously, if you're watching online, you can see the film of him playing cornerback, defensive back there. I think he'll play offense for Oregon, at least to start out, but just an elite get. And, at the end of the day, if getting Chris Henry had cost you Jaylen Lott, I don't know that that's necessarily as big of a win as it looks on paper, right? It kind of is like, okay, well, that's kind of a negating factor there. So at the very least, you were able to hold on to Jaylen Lott, get him signed. I don't really honestly think there was any drama there at the end, but I do know it made fans uneasy for about a day or so. So, kudos to the staff for getting this one locked in, because he's going to be a good one.
Jaylen Lott is a tremendous player. You look at the tape and what he's able to do with the wide receiver position, the speed, the body control, the ball skills, just how fluid of a mover he is. That's not something that you see with your average wide receiver. So as the cycle kind of went on, especially when he earned 5-star status in the latest Rivals ranking update, and especially when his letter hadn't come in yet, it just got more and more important for Oregon to hang on to Jaylen Lott. And my sourcing was kind of telling me that it was either going to be Jaylen Lott or Jaylen Lott and Chris Henry. I don't think it was necessarily Jaylen Lott or Chris Henry, which, to your point, kind of goes to what the timeline of events. Like, Jaylen Lott has been committed to Oregon since July. So I think it was definitely important to hang on to him. Not to say you don't want Chris Henry. I mean, any program would, but I think that it's important that you stick with the guy, or able to keep a guy that has been committed to you for quite a while here. So
Yeah.
I think that's a great development for Oregon that he was able to come in. Definitely a little bit of the best for last kind of scenario, as he is one of the 5 5-stars in this class. So the wide receiver position just continues to get better at Oregon from a recruiting perspective, which isn't something that we should say lightly with Ross Douglas coming over from Syracuse, Justin.
No, no. I mean, like you said, he was kind of behind the eight ball, if you will, when he got hired. At the time that he got hired, fortunately, was able to lean into that relationship with Messiah Hampton, because, I mean, I know he's not a 5-star, but that kid's film's electric too. He's going to be a really good one for Oregon. But, to be able to get him and Jaylen Lott, of course, Oregon went after Hudson Lewis late and made him a priority down the stretch. They're, not as highly heralded as the other two, but there's a lot to like about his film, and just continues to round out that room. I think that, Ross Douglas did a tremendous job this cycle. Obviously, a credit to him to be where he was with Chris Henry here late in the process. Obviously didn't get it over the finish line, but still was able to start building his relationship in the spring, and really, hopefully, that's kind of a big factor that kept Oregon in the game here down the stretch, was the fact that he'd worked so hard there. Really. And again, I think you technically count him, right? But Gatlin Bear, don't forget, that's a 5-star coming to town. That's a pretty good football player, and a part of this. And I'm really excited to see him get back and work his way into shape, because he's not going to be in the kind of shape he needs to be in, and get ready with the program here. I believe he will be on campus in January, so that'll be getting going here in about a month for him.
That's another great development for Oregon as we still await the final decision for Evan Stewart. Will we see Evan Stewart for Oregon in the playoffs? I feel like my gut is kind of trending towards him coming back, Justin, just so he can get more game experience, more film for scouts. I mean, we know he's a tremendous talent, but I feel like a lot of this draft stuff is what have you done for me lately? So I think that kind of bodes for Oregon right now. That's my pulse, but you never know. You absolutely never know. Um, so the wide receiver position was one that obviously Oregon placed a heavy emphasis on in this class. But another one that Oregon went really hard after was the secondary. And that's kind of where some of the signees popped for me, with Jet Washington coming in as a 5-star, Xavier Larice, one of the most coveted players in the country, a couple of late additions in Trevon Watson from College of San Mateo at corner, and Azel Banag, a 3-star from South Carolina that the Ducks were able to kind of get on late. So what do you think about this secondary haul that the Ducks are coming in with?
Yeah, I think this room is a lot. The secondary room is a lot different than the wide receiver room, and what I mean by that is there's a lot of young talent in the secondary room. Of course, there's DeCorian Moore and Cooper Perry at wide receiver, but there's not a lot, right? There's not a lot of guys, and I think there are a lot of guys in the secondary room that are young, that have a lot of promise. Both Ife Obadegwu and obviously Brandon Finney will be back. Some of the starters at the safety position will be back next year. We're still kind of waiting to see what Peyton Woodyard does. Naeem Alford, obviously Trey McNutt was hurt this year. These guys are going to be good for several years. You just added more really good players into that room, and it's stacked with depth. I mean, it's 2-3 deep pretty much at any spot in that room. So I think that with the way that room is structured now and the guys they went and got in this cycle, they should be able to operate like this every year, where it's like, hey, we need 4 or 5 guys total to keep this room stocked for the future, and we're good. You don't have to go sign 10 guys and try and make it up. So, a guy like Davin Benjamin, I just love him. I think he's going to be a terrific player. Kind of has that dog mentality, if you will. He's a big play turnover waiting to happen. And then, a guy like Jet Washington, he's a freak. I mean, he's a unicorn. He's a freak. I mean, you're talking about a guy that's 6'5", 6'6", and it's obviously well documented at this point that he's around 205-ish, but folks see that he could put 220 pounds on his frame or so, 225 even. You get a big guy like that you're able to move around. That's pretty dangerous in the defense. And one thing that I've noticed, I think others have noticed, is that Oregon under Dan Lanning has done a really good job of going out and finding these guys that have position versatility on the defense. So a guy that you might have play nickel or star, but you can bring them up in the box to the same with some of your linebackers. Maybe they can, cruise up to the edge and be an extra body on the line. They do like to get these defensive guys with some position versatility, and that's what a guy like Jet Washington brings to the table.
I think versatility is the key word that stands out to me when I'm thinking about this secondary. I wrote a story over on ScoopDuck about how Jet Washington is essentially a ball of clay. We talked about his physical makeup and how you just don't see a lot of safeties at that size. But there's people that I've spoken with on the football scene out here, and obviously Vegas isn't in Southern California, but they're not too far apart. And I think Greg Biggins even echoed it, like maybe Jet Washington kicks down a level. Maybe he's a guy who puts on that weight and becomes a linebacker or becomes an edge even. We've seen Oregon take former safeties and convert them into linebackers. Look at Jeffrey Bossa. Look at Jamal Hill. Both of those guys are in the NFL now. So I think that's something that's really exciting. Devin Jackson from Florida is somebody that could potentially see the field early. I think a lot of it obviously hinges on what happens with Dylan Thieneman. He's kind of the biggest question mark right now. Is he going to come back? I thought he was a shoo-in. A lot of people talked about him as a first-round talent. I don't know if his play has necessarily cemented him at that status, but he has come on really strong here in the back half of the season, Justin. The Ducks are going to lose Jaden Kennedy, who's going to exhaust his eligibility. So hopefully you have another great nickel on the roster that is going to be able to step in and fill in for him. But aside from Jaylen Lott and Chris Henry Jr., Justin, there really wasn't that much drama for Oregon this cycle. Devin Jackson was one of 3 guys that signed on the second day along with Kendra Harrison and then Jaylen Lott, who we just talked about. Devin Jackson took a late visit to Nebraska along with his teammate Danny Odom, who's committed to the Huskers. But I think that was more just a fun trip to get out there. But yeah, the secondary is going to be really special for this class, and I'm just so excited. Any position that you look at, there's just a lot of really good talent on the way.
With the way recruiting works now, I don't fault any of these kids for taking visits later in the process. First reason is, and I'm not speaking just about Devin Jackson in particular, but he's one of them. First things first, you're committing back in June and July or whatever the case might be. There's a lot that can happen in that time frame between July and December. I think it's wise for you to go back and maybe say, hey, look, I like these 2 or 3 schools when I committed. I'm just going to go double check and make sure I'm still good with my decision. I don't see any harm in that. And secondly, because of what happens with coaching, the coaching carousel, you need to be prepared in case, Hampton takes a job somewhere else. His name was out there. Oregon obviously lost their defensive coordinator in Tosh Lupoy. That's going to happen. I think if I was a parent and those are my kids, I'd tell them, hey, look, be honest with the school you're committed to. Tell them, do the right thing. Take a couple visits, make sure of your choice. Just have that in your back pocket just in case. And then you can, obviously continue, sign and remain committed. I think that's what some of those kids were doing, and I don't blame them for it anymore.
So what else sticks out to you, Justin, about this class here and what we're seeing from Oregon? Another elite haul for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. They're among the very best in the sport when it comes to talent acquisition. We can talk about them hanging on to everybody. Some more guys that maybe catch your eye. Where do you kind of want to go with this?
Well, there's a lot of angles we can take, but I'm going to throw a question back your way, and it's going to be a little bit of a curveball.
Oh, let's go.
Yeah, it's not a tough one, but because there was 5, which 5 stars is your favorite? Which one is the one that excites you the most? I'm asking you. My answer is Kendra Harrison. I think they're all great. They're obviously 5 stars for a reason, but that kid's a freak, a unicorn, and I am really excited to see him in the offense next year.
Yeah, I think I would go with Tank Jones along the defensive line. I mean, Oregon has brought in a lot of really good talent over the years, and since you and I have been working together, getting my start at ScoopDuck, but there's just something different about a 5-star defensive lineman out of the Southeast. I mean, the caliber of competition he's going against, I think I'm incredibly interested to see if he's able to find his way onto the field early. I think that's obviously the expectation with 5 stars, Justin, but as we've seen, that is definitely not the case. Once you get to campus anywhere, those stars don't mean anything. So we'll kind of see what happens with Mateo Uiagalelei and Tatum Tuioti. I tend to think they lose one of them, but if they can get both of those guys back and you bring in Tank Jones and Elijah Rushing can take a step forward, we've seen some of Nasir Wyatt. I just get really interested and really excited about putting a lot more pressure on the opposing quarterback. So I'd go with Tank Jones for me.
Yeah, it's a great pick, and I suspect if we had a chance to have a off the record conversation with Dan Lanning, he'd probably say Tank Jones too, because that seems like exactly his kind of player that would get him excited, somebody that he would be able to coach and help develop at Oregon. But yeah, Tank's a good one. And again, Oregon goes into the state of Bama and pulls the best player from the state 2 years in a row. I'm pretty sure that that would never happen if Nick Saban was still there. I could see that one really, getting under his skin a little bit. But no, that was the curveball I had. A lot of ways you and I could go with this. I just, one thing that I circle back to is just one of the things that made this recruiting cycle relatively boring, if you will, was just that there wasn't much drama, right? Yeah, I mean, there wasn't, the late decommitments. There was a couple commitments Oregon picked up late in the process. Other than I guess maybe Devin Jackson taking visits. Even though Oregon lost both coordinators, it didn't seem like you and I were having to go and dig and make sure, hey, is everybody locked in? Are we all good? Because they were all locked in and all good. So, I think that was a big thing. I think one critique I would have for this class is just simply that I I guess I would have too. And I think it's good for you and I to not just be sunshine pumpers, to have some, some negative opinions or whatever you want to call it. I I I understand USC was super aggressive and they did a much better job recruiting this year. And I do believe that that hurt Oregon a little bit in terms of Southern Oregon or Southern California recruiting. I just, Oregon lost a step there. Didn't really do well at Mater Dei this year, which they've done incredibly well in years past. And I'm not saying that, they missed on all of them, they were all misses, but I think we can both agree that, watching a guy like Tom end up at USC, or seeing Cody Green end up at Washington, I understand the reasons and why, and you don't want to just go throw money at them. But on the surface, if we're being honest, I think that there's some losses, particularly in SoCal, that Oregon went through this cycle. And I say that because a year ago at this time, maybe it was in February, but we were listening to an interview with Marshall Malco, and he was talking specifically about, hey, you could build a roster out of the California talent this recruiting cycle and win a championship with it. And I just don't think they did as well as they could have, should have. I think that's one thing that I'm looking at there. The second is, and I've already said it on the site, Oregon didn't do well on the interior of the defensive line, and I think that's an area that needed to probably have another body or two in this recruiting class. By no means am I pushing the panic button. I'm certain that Dan Lanning is well aware of what he needs in that room, far more than I am. But if I'm grading it just on that alone, I do think that the misses in Southern California in particular, and the lack of interior defensive line bodies, are my two big critiques.
Let's dive into the Southern California point a bit more. Obviously, I have a very special interest in that because I live in Southern California, and I spend a lot of time around the high school scene out here. I think it's a very valid point. We can also start off just by acknowledging the guys that they were able to get. Davon Benjamin was, I would say, was the biggest target in the area for the entirety of the cycle. I mean, that was a guy I had heard about for years. And it was like, if Oregon doesn't get this guy, all hell's going to break loose on our message boards, which have been incredible throughout the last 3 days. I mean, the sheer volume of interaction and comments that we've had from subscribers have been tremendous. And I know we've got a lot of new people over there. So just on that topic, come and check us out at ScoopDuck. $1 gets you started, and you can get a complimentary year of access to the Athletic as well. So like, there's no better time than now. But you have Davon Benjamin, Prince Tavazon, Dutch Horsk, Bryson Beaver. I think that's everybody, at least in SoCal. But there's a lot more that you could have had, right? Tom was committed to Oregon for a long time. He's a Southern California guy. Caden Dixon Wyatt and Chris Henry at Mater Dei, those were two that Oregon had been involved with for a long time as well. Cody Green, I feel like that one doesn't hurt as much because he's going to Washington, and we've seen the gap between those two programs, especially when it comes to recruiting. But they could have done better for sure. I think you would, like a year ago, the hit rate compared to now isn't as high. So that's to your point. For me, I think I would maybe look at linebacker recruiting a little bit. And that's not to say that they didn't sign good linebackers. I think Tristan Phillips and Braylon Hodge are two really talented linebackers that are going to, develop into good players at Oregon. But just throughout the cycle, there's so many names that they went after and they ultimately didn't get. So I feel like it's reasonable to talk about it, but at the same time, it's like if they end up being okay and the linebacker group gets better, it's kind of a net positive, or, net neutral, maybe, if that's a good way to put it. But like, you had Nick Abrams, you had Tyler Atkinson, you have Bo Jandro, who's from Brian Michalowski's native state of Arizona, but he has a twin brother, and I don't think that Oregon necessarily wanted to add him. So like, there's levels to it, and there's different things that you could go into. But I think for their board being what it was and finishing as it was, I think it left a little bit to be desired. And that's not to say it isn't good, but I think it could have been even better. So that's a position that we're going to have a close eye on here now that Bryce Betcher is going to be moving on. And I think Jerry Mixon's going to be the new face of that room.
Well, and it's, speaking specifically about linebacker, it's the second year in a row where you went after several big names and didn't end up with one of them. And again, we're not saying that it's a bad room. It's not a bad room, but having like one of those special generational guys, would be nice, right? Getting a Justin Williams or getting a Tyler Atkinson or whatever, getting one of those, special players, I think would really solidify that room. It really becomes an interesting room to me because, as we know in the past, Brian Michalowski has been very anti transfer portal for his position group for linebacker, and you start to look at the room with Betcher leaving now, and it's like, is there a need? It feels like there certainly could be a need for a portal linebacker, especially if you're going to try and make the run next year that we think Oregon is. It becomes kind of just an interesting thought in itself, and maybe they're confident enough. I mean, I think we saw moments with Platt out there and Williams out there, Matudi a little bit. Some of the younger guys getting some run, and had good games, had solid games. And like you said, Jerry Mixon has obviously elevated his game this season. We know that, and he'll be back. But I could see an argument for a transfer portal linebacker, and it'll just be interesting if they entertain that.
We'll be covering the transfer portal and a whole lot more over on ScoopDuck. Before we wrap up the show, got a quick message for Duck fans. Are you going to an Oregon game this season? If you are, the Oakway Lifestyle Center at the corner of Oakway and Coburg is the destination for Duck fans. Whatever you're looking for, they've got it all. Get a bite to eat at Summer River Brewing or PF Chang's. Check out shops like Lululemon or Nordstrom Rack. Need a place to stay? Book your lodging at the Hyatt Place at Oakway Center and visit their rooftop bar. The Oakway Lifestyle Center is walking distance from Autzen Stadium, has something for everybody, and is a great post-game place to celebrate another Duck victory. Certainly hoping we get to see another Duck home game this year, Justin, as we anxiously await the release of the college football playoff rankings. I believe that is on Sunday, Selection Sunday, if memory serves. And I know Oregon fans certainly don't want to have a top 4 spot and have a bias situation like last year. But as we kind of just wrap this episode up and put a bow on the 2026 class, I think you just look at how Oregon has addressed their needs. That's ultimately what I think signifies a good class versus a great class. And I think this is another great class. I wrote a story again yesterday about Oregon stacking elite recruiting class after elite recruiting class, 3 straight years in the top 5. That is certainly a recipe for success. And I think we're going to continue to see players playing earlier in their college careers, whether that means playing right out of the gate as a true freshman, or even like an Aaron Flowers as a redshirt freshman, Ifeoma Badegwu as a redshirt freshman as well. The caliber of talent continues to climb in Eugene.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what Nick Saban did at Alabama. It's exactly what Kirby Smart does at Georgia. Is just every year, hey, we need to make sure we're in the top 5. And if we're not in the top 5, we better be damn close to it, right? And I think, that's the case for Oregon. And one thing that really lends merit to this current roster and the talent that it has is the fact that Oregon only signed 21 guys, right? They didn't need to go get 30 something guys, and there's no problem with the teams that do. Like, if you do, be active and go get them. Oregon doesn't need to. They do have a really good roster. They keep that roster in Eugene. Their retention is second to none. And then the next thing we know, on top of that, the cherry on top, is that Oregon pretty much plucks whoever they want out of the transfer portal when that rolls around. So I think we'll be looking at potentially around 10 transfers, probably coming into the program, depending on a few decisions, which you talked about earlier. There's a couple decisions, but I think you'll see Oregon, looking at about 10 guys, give or take a few. And, again, there'll be an immediate, anybody that's a top, a top transfer, Oregon's going to be on the short list for them right away.
So as the 2026 class kind of comes to a close, Justin, I think that I just think back about how fun it's been to cover this haul of talent. I mean, our subscribers always make it fun to talk about. And I mean, I got to thank the coaching staff because they give us great players to talk about that they recruit. And there's these windows and there's these pockets of it's go time. Coming out of OV season, early July is when we saw this latest spurt of commitments for the Ducks. Junior Day is always very, very popular early January. So, I mean, I'm just excited to see what the Ducks do next time, because the recruiting and personnel and roster focus that you and I have and what we do is just always forward looking. And I'm just so excited to see what comes next. And ultimately, just such a special time right now at ScoopDuck with some of the national analysts that have come over to the Rivals Network, and just everything we have going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, the what you get for your money at ScoopDuck is unmatched, in my opinion. And I know I'm biased, of course, but I mean, obviously the two of us are there every day. But when you have a guy like Greg Biggins in there, popping in there, and you have a guy like Steve Wiltfong and Adam Gordy and Sam Spiegelman and all the terrific talent, Pete Nakos dropping over there. We even had a Josh Pate sighting at one point. I think it was last week. Popped up in one of the threads posted about his podcast. So just kind of a special time for our subscribers. All the national guys do such a terrific job. You get to go read Brett McMurphy, Andy Staples, and all the guys that make college football fun. So, and here's the thing: look at the activity for the last couple of days, because it was Jaylen Lott and Chris Henry Jr. and they're both 5 stars, right? It's a lot more fun when you and I get to go cover these elite guys that we got to all cycle long, right? Everybody wants to talk about a Nacho, an Ihi Nacho, or a Kendre Harrison, or a Jet Washington. Those are the guys that get people really excited, and you and I get to go talk to them all year long, which is pretty special.
Absolutely. I'm hoping that I get to go to the Navy All American Bowl in January, and I'll kind of see more of these guys with my own eyes that are from all over the country, and look at the 27s as well. Just a very unique opportunity. But we also are going to be covering Oregon's search for an offensive coordinator, Oregon's search for a defensive coordinator. So there is no better place to be than Scoop Duck right now. Definitely encourage you guys to check us out. Justin, I got a radio hit that I got to get ready for, so I think we're going to have to cut it off there. If people want to find more of you, Justin, they can find you at jhopkinssd. Find me at Torres Sports, and check us out at scoopduck.com. But thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.